Welcome back to the Front 3, the show where I recap 3 games, 3 stories, 3 stars, and 3 stooges from the recent Premier League game week. Late's better than never, but let's get right into it. The first game of the week that we have to talk about is Everton's collapse against Aston Villa. Toffees fans must have been nervous when they went up 2-0 for the second consecutive game, knowing what happened against Bournemouth. Sure enough, they became just the second team to be up 2-0 and lose successive Premier League matches. Everton again looked to have some attacking threat, with some good balls into the box and more dynamic play than usual from Iliman Ndiaye and Dwight McNeil. Villa were sluggish to start, but Ollie Watkins had a bunch of first-half chances, putting away one making me think that Villa would end up running away with it. In the second half, Villa did just that, with Everton playing within themselves far too much and letting the villains keep collecting chances. Calvert-Lewin had a few chances in the second half too, and his indecisiveness in front of goal and an unfortunate finish off the post ended up costing them, as John Duran scored one of the best goals I've ever seen to seal the game. The loss sunk Everton to only their third 0-4 start in history, and their first in 66 years. Their implosion last week could have been viewed as a random event, but this week confirmed that Everton have a lot to work on in order to stay up this season. The goals are encouraging though, and they'll look to bounce back in some winnable fixtures coming up. Villa have already gone on to win their first Champions League game on Tuesday, and I think they'll take some great momentum from this victory. I liked seeing Jacob Ramsey play a big role after a season with fewer minutes, and Emi Buendia coming on after a long injury layoff was another good moment. Crystal Palace and Leicester played out the next highest scoring game of the weekend, drawing 2-2. Leicester started well, with some good pressing and energy leading to a chance for Ayew and a goal for the timeless Jamie Vardy. Mabudidi made it 2 just after halftime, off the back of a lucky bounce and some excellent work by Wilfred Ndidi to lay it back to him, but Mateta scored his first immediately after, which was subject to a very weird VAR review. I do think he ultimately was onside and behind the ball, but every angle made it look like he was offside, and I don't think anyone on the pitch thought the goal would stand until it did. Nevertheless, Palace went on to control the rest of the game, and they were rewarded with a late penalty to salvage a point. Some big storylines for Crystal Palace were Eddie Nketiah looking good alongside Mateta and Eze in the front line, Czech Doucouré and Adam Wharton partnering in midfield, and the miss of Chris Richards and Chadi Riyad seeming pretty important, as their defense was shaky throughout. For Leicester, it's another missed opportunity, and I think they sit in too much when they score an early goal. It was weird how the 2-1 scoreline really seemed to stifle any chance they had of grabbing another. Add to that the very defensive lineup in midfield, and Cooper's defensive substitutions, and I feel Leicester might need to be a little more expansive in order to stay in the league, since I have little faith in their defense at this point. And of course, I can't forget about the North London derby, which saw a depleted Arsenal take all 3 points against rival Spurs. A second-choice midfield of Partey and Jorginho was countered by a very bold Maddison, Kulusevski, and Betancourt combination from Ange Postecoglou, and it looked like Spurs would be the favourites to score, as they dominated possession and the chances. It was a very physical game, lots of headers, strong challenges, corners, and energy. But in my opinion, Arsenal displayed just a little more quality across the pitch, which led to the narrow victory. For the most part, Tottenham weren't able to carve out much more than long-range efforts and some very difficult headers, and even though Arsenal were not vintage going forward, they were able to take their chance from a Gabriel header. Tottenham's continued inability to defend set pieces, particularly in-swinging corners, came to the fore again, and it was great to see the emotion shown by Gabriel and the rest of the Arsenal team when the goal went in. It was a real derby atmosphere in the stadium. For Spurs, it wasn't all doom and gloom though, as they definitely were the better side in the day in terms of controlling the game. Kulusevski looks strong, Mickey van de Ven is still coming back from a brief time out but is so fun to watch, and Dominic Solanke, despite being left to his own devices against the central defenders often, did well to get a few difficult headed efforts on target. Ange will be looking at training to figure out how his team can break down a low block, which they'll see a lot more of this season, as well as how to get Solanke more involved in play and on the end of better chances. For Arsenal, 3 points is massive, and they should regroup and play a bit better going forward. Odegaard's importance was evident though, and with the loss of Fabio Vieira and Emil Smith-Rowe, I wonder if they might have made a mistake losing too much creativity from their bench. Despite the low scoreline, it was a very solid North London derby. Let's move on to my 3 stories. It's only 4 games into the season, but I'm going early and saying that Southampton are already relegation fodder. They aren't cut adrift yet, but they have one of the worst possible combinations in the Premier League. They're a possession-oriented side without the skill or clinical nature necessary to capitalize on their ball retention. They lost to Newcastle after playing with a man advantage for most of the game, dropped all 3 points to Nottingham Forest and Brentford despite controlling the game, and this week got outgunned by Manchester United in a game that was relatively even, until it wasn't. At least Leicester seemed to have a goal-scoring edge, Everton have more Premier League talent, and Ipswich seem far more coherent. They would have to beat all 3 of those sides, it would seem, in order to stay up, and I don't see it happening. Now, I don't suggest they necessarily change their style. As long as the fans and ownership are content with returning to the championship, I think allowing their players to continue with Russell Martin's vision is probably the right move, even if they do end up going back down. But after 2 games, the Saints' return to the Prem looks to be a short-lived one. In more positive news, Nottingham Forest have an identity. Forest is one of the teams I thought could be a relegation candidate as well, but their statement win against Liverpool and great starts to the season have me eating my words. I think everyone was waiting for the Forest experiment to collapse, with a huge squad and a generally disliked coach in Nuno taking charge. But to their credit, this is the first time since their return to the top flight that I see a real direction with their side. They still have too many players rotating in and out in my opinion, but the lineup does seem to be more stable. It revolves around the spine of the team, with goalkeeper Sells, defenders Milenkovic, Murillo and Aina, midfielders Anderson and Gibbs-White, and striker Chris Wood cementing their places in the team most weeks. Then, in games that are perceived to be winnable, dynamic wingers Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Elanga join the fray, while against Liverpool, Nuno opted to start their game with more secure midfielders. Hudson-Odoi ended up coming on and making the difference anyway, showing that Forest has a game plan that is relatively consistent week to week, but adaptable to different occasions. They're still overly reliant on counter-attacking and moments of magic, but their squad is set up to succeed with that approach, and the defense is much more settled than in years past. I think Forest will secure a solid mid-table finish. Newcastle can't keep doing this, can they? Against Wolves, the Magpies snatched victory with 2 late bangers from Fabian Schär and Harvey Barnes. They've already beaten Southampton with 10 men, scored a late winner against Tottenham after Spurs dominated the game, and snatched another late goal to draw with Bournemouth, picking up 6 more points than expected in just 4 games this season. Their game against Wolves was relatively even, and it wouldn't have been a shock to see the 2-1 scoreline in favor of Newcastle. They had their fair share of chances, most notably when Anthony Gordon clipped the post in the first half, but for my money, Wolves had the best chances of the game. But I wasn't surprised by Newcastle's comeback, because they just seem to have a killer instinct late in games. Whether it's because they're well coached, patient, lucky, talented, or a combination of all of the above, Newcastle seem inevitable. Moving on to my 3 stars of the week, starting with Carlos Baleba. Brighton may not have beaten Ipswich, but I couldn't help but be enamored with Carlos Baleba's performance. He's a tall, strong, silky midfielder who can do it all. The tight combinations around the box, a goal threat, defensive solidity, and forward passing were all on display in what was probably a frustrating game for the Seagulls. Brighton did buy him for a good chunk of change, but Baleba will be their next huge profit gainer if they decide to sell him in a season or 2. Shout out to Ipswich's defense and keeper Muric, who all could have found themselves in this list as well. Second is Ola Aina. Several Nottingham Forest defenders could have picked up recognition this week, but how about some love for Ola Aina? The Chelsea Academy product has been great to start the year, and he was vital in shutting down Liverpool's star-studded attack, especially the informed Luis Diaz, in their upset win. There didn't look like there was room for him when he first made the switch from Torino, but he's carved out a role with his ability to play on both sides, comfort in possession, and unquestionably competent defensive capabilities. Ollie Watkins and John Durant combined for a hat-trick in the best game of the weekend, earning them my first star of the game week, and my first ever joint award. Watkins had struggled to start the year, so to see him get off the mark with a brace is encouraging signs for a Villa team that is still finding their groove. Durant off the bench looks like the best player in the league, and his goal is one of the truest strikes I've seen in years. This might be premature, but the best strike duo in the entire league may belong to Aston Villa. Where there are stars, there are stooges, and starting with Mark Gay in third. Gay would probably say himself that he didn't have the best performance in Palace's draw with Leicester. He was outmuscled once in a key area, lost a battle with Jamie Vardy for the striker's goal, and misjudged a pass that led to another good chance. For a player that was touted for a £60 million move to Newcastle, and needed to step up in the debut of Maxence Lacroix, his performance wasn't up to par. I'm not concerned about Gay long-term, but he wasn't good enough against Leicester. I respect Connor Cody as a defender a lot, but tasked with coming on to hold a lead, his cameo did not go well, and he's my second stooge of the week, after he gave away a cheap, stonewall penalty to hand Crystal Palace a stoppage time equalizer. You could see his disappointment written all over his face, and Mateta slotting away the spot kick meant his blushes were not spared. I talked about Leicester's shaky central defender options earlier in the year, and Cody didn't do much to disprove that notion this week. But my first stooge of the week is Sean Dyche. Dyche may not be the main reason for the state of Everton Football Club, but he has to take responsibility for his team's back-to-back collapses. Whether it's a lack of motivation, imperfect tactics, poor personnel choices, a lack of fitness, or something else entirely, his formula that had worked so long at Burnley is not working this year. Durant's wonder strike was something of an aberration, and Calvert-Lewin had chances to put the game away, but Villa could have easily scored more too. Dyche needs to take a hard look at his side and figure out some solutions for their woes. Well, it's a bit of a shorter episode this week since it's coming out so late. Leave a comment with your favorite stories of the game week, subscribe, and peace.